Hello and welcome to part 2 of the section Scarcity and Markets, which is the first section that we're covering in Engineering Economics, a course for students in the Civil Engineering program at the University of Kurdistan. This lecture is being brought to you from quarantine because of the coronavirus pandemic. Now, since the last lecture, what did we cover? We covered scarcity in markets, and we talked about how basically everything has scarce resources. Resources are the things we can use to get the things we want if we're consumers, or if we're producers, they're the things we have to produce the product that we intend to sell, so being a good or a service. And we talked about how when people meet their needs, it's always according to Maslow's hierarchy of need, and we looked at examples of that. But we also looked at the marketplace, and we talked about how there were different portions of the market. You have the primary, secondary, and tertiary sector. But today we're going to be looking at scarcity, and we're going to be looking at this concept called opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is what emerges because we have scarce resources, meaning that we can't have everything we want. We have to make decisions, and when we choose one option, we forsake another option. So we're going to be looking at opportunity cost and how it influences how we make a decision. And then we're going to be looking at opportunity cost in a way that evaluates the true cost of a good or a service for us. And this is really the difference between economics and accounting, and we will get to that in due course. So last lecture we looked at this example that Hassan has $10 and he's very hungry and greedy, and he wants to go to the bakery to buy lukmakazi, jalebi, and kulichi. Apologies if I haven't pronounced any of that correctly. But what does he do? He has $10, but the issue is the lukmakazi is $5, the jalebi is $3, and the kulichi is $6. With the $10 he has, he cannot get everything that he wants. He has to make a decision. What decision does he make? Well, first off, we need to look at all of the options that he has. So he has a few different options. He could buy, he can choose not to buy anything and keep $10. He could just buy the kulichi and keep $4. He could buy the jalebi and keep $7. He could buy lukmakazi and keep $5. He could buy lukmakazi and jalebi and keep $2, or he could buy the kulichi and the jalebi and keep $1. He can't buy the kulichi and the lukmakazi because he doesn't have enough money, and he can't buy all three. Now, what option is Hassan going to choose? Well, we can't tell for certain. That will depend on how hungry Hassan is, what his financial stability is, and what is maybe his preferred sweet. But let's, for example, say that he chooses to buy kulichi and jalebi and keep $1. That's his first choice. Now, his second choice, his second best option would be to buy lukmakazi and jalebi and keep $2. But his first choice is kulichi and jalebi and to keep $1, so that's what he does. The opportunity cost is explained here. The accounting cost of his decision is $9. He has spent $9. So remember how we talked about how accounting is about finances and about money, and economics is about decisions. But the kulichi, by going to option 1, has it really cost him only $9? Well, There is also the opportunity cost of missing out on lukmakazi. He would have enjoyed eating that lukmakazi, and by choosing option one, his first choice, he has forsaken that. He has also missed out on saving an extra dollar. So, what is the opportunity cost? It's not $9 that he is spending, it is the joy of eating lukmakazi plus $1. That is the cost that Hassan is feeling with his choice, because his second choice was not to not buy anything and keep $10. He wasn't going to do that. He's far too hungry and greedy for that. So the cost that he is feeling is missing out on the lukmakazi plus the $1. So a way to describe the opportunity cost is it is the felt cost. It is what Hassan is missing out on. It's not the cost that he pays in terms of money, it's the cost that he is feeling. And Hassan is feeling the disappointment of not having lukmakazi plus the cost of $1. That's the opportunity cost. So remember, the accounting cost is the resources that are actually spent. So in this case, $9. However, the opportunity cost is the best alternative that is foregone when making a decision. It is the second best option that is given up in order to benefit from the best option. That is the true cost. That is what we are feeling. Now, the marginal opportunity cost, this is another definition that we will see in due course when we look at production possibility curves again. It is the effect of producing additional units of a product in terms of the opportunities that are given up. So, remember we looked at the production possibility curve for that mine that was producing gold, and it was also producing coal. We could potentially move our production along that production possibility curve, and we could get an extra 5 grams of gold every week. But the opportunity cost would be the amount of tonnage of coal that we would be forsaking. That is the opportunity cost. And so you need to decide at what point is the tonnage of coal that I'm losing worth more than the grams of gold that I'm gaining. And so that's why I said before in the last lecture that if your x-axis and your y-axis are exactly the same units, meaning dollars, if you're a businessman who's smart, your production would always be on the point of the production possibility curve where the gradient is 45 degrees. The marginal opportunity cost is equal to what you would gain by producing one extra unit in either direction. So let's have a look at this on a production possibility curve. This is the example we looked at where you are at week 11, you've got your final, or you're at week 9, let's say, you've got 2 weeks to study for the final exams, and you're doing 2 modules. You're doing the economics module with me, and you're doing the calculus module with Mr. Satyendra, I assume. Now, you are currently studying at B. You're studying very efficiently, which means you're on the curve. As I said, that's actually a little unrealistic, but nonetheless. Now, if you continue to study at B, you're going to get 75% in calculus and you're going to get 30% in economics. I'm a tough marker. Everyone knows that. Now, you think, actually, Mr. Collins, he's a really tough marker. He's a tough teacher. Satyendra is a much nicer man. I should probably be studying a little bit more for economics and I will forsake some study for calculus. So you move from B to C. And so now, with your current trajectory, you will be gaining a certain grade in economics, that is 45%. But you are falling in your calculus grade to 55%. What is the opportunity cost of moving to C? Well, the opportunity cost is the chance to get 75% in calculus and 30% in economics. That's the opportunity cost. The marginal opportunity cost is 20%. That is what you're losing. That's what it's costing you. So the law of diminishing returns, if we're looking at marginal opportunity cost, we need to remember that over time, for every unit of resources we use to produce a product, we'll increase production in increasingly smaller increments. So an example could be that you could study for 0 hours for an exam and get 30%. You could study for 5 hours for exam and get 60%. You could study 10 hours for the exam and get 70%. You could study 100 hours for the exam and get 75%. So you can see with each portion of hours you put, resources you invest into your exam, the increment that you increase your grade decreases. If you've ever learned a language, a second language, you know this. When I first started learning Arabic, it seemed like every day that I studied Arabic, I would double the amount of Arabic that I had. By the time I'd been studying Arabic for 1 year, every time I did some study, I couldn't really notice the difference in my ability in Arabic. And that's why discipline is very important for learning a language or anything, because motivation is temporary, but discipline is permanent. Now, this example, we can also put that into a production possibility curve. And so you can invest more and more hours into studying economics, but the grade you get will increase by a smaller increment. At the same time, you are taking more hours away from calculus, and the cost of doing that is increasing. You're losing more grade in calculus. And so the law of diminishing returns is what determines why the production possibility curve is actually a curve. It's not a straight line. You can study really hard for calculus and get 80% and get 20% in economics, but if you study even more for calculus, you're only going to get maybe 82% for calculus, but your economics grade will drop to 5%. So that's why production possibility curves are curvy. So let's see this on an example. So this is a farm. Now this farm is producing cotton and it's producing wheat. And so many of the resources that go into cotton production are the same resources that go into wheat production. You're using land, you're using water for irrigation, you're also using capital to buy seed, and you're also using labor. You're using people to work on the farm, as well as machines to harvest the crop. Now, let's say you're currently working at A. You're using the farm to produce 200 tons of wheat and 300 tons of cotton. Now let's say if you move from A to B, you're suddenly only going to be producing 160 tons of wheat, but you've increased your output on cotton by 100 tons. What is the opportunity cost of moving from A to B in this case? Well, the opportunity cost is 40 tons of wheat. That is the cost that you are forsaking by putting resources that you would have otherwise been using for wheat towards cotton. Put it this way, the extra 100 tons of cotton involves sacrificing 40 tons of wheat. So the opportunity cost is 4/10 for a ton of wheat for every extra ton of cotton. That's the marginal opportunity cost. So for every extra ton of cotton, you will be losing 0.4 tons of wheat. Now that marginal opportunity cost will change as you move up and down the production possibility curve because it's a curve, and the steeper the gradient, meaning below B, then the opportunity cost of producing more wheat or cotton will be greater. You will be losing more wheat. So where should they be producing? Should they be producing at A and B or B? Well, that will depend on the amount of money that you get from wheat and the amount of money you get from cotton. I can tell you now that 1 ton of wheat is worth a lot more money than 1 ton of cotton. So if we were going to change this production possibility curve to being out of dollars, money made from wheat tonnage and money made from cotton tonnage, then the curve will be a slightly different shape, and the most profitable position for the company, the farm, will be where on the curve it is declining at a 45% incline, 45-degree incline, if the units for the x and y axes are the same. That would mean that the marginal cost of going up or down will be equal to the marginal opportunity cost will be equal to what would be gained. So that would be the most profitable place. So that's a production possibility curve. One other thing, you can see in the top of the title there, it says PPF. That stands for Production Possibility Frontier, and it's just another word for production possibility curve. I got this slide off the internet, so if there's a difference in terminology, don't worry. Production possibility curve, production possibility frontier, they're exactly the same thing. Now, let's have a look at the law of diminishing returns. So, we moved from A to B, and the opportunity cost was 40 tons of wheat. The marginal opportunity cost was 4/10 a ton of wheat for every ton of cotton that we gain. But now let's say we want to produce even more cotton and we're going to forsake more wheat. So we move from B to C. Suddenly, we've gained an extra 80 tons of wheat. We've gone from of cotton. Sorry, we've gone from 400 tons of cotton to 480 tons of cotton. But we've dropped from 160 tons of wheat to 80 tons of wheat. The opportunity cost is that lost wheat. The opportunity cost is 80 tons of wheat. So, in order to gain an extra 80 tons of cotton, we've lost 80 tons of wheat. Now think about that. When we moved from A to B, we gained an extra 100 tons of cotton, but we lost only 40 tons of wheat. This is an example of the law of diminishing returns. The marginal opportunity cost decreases. Right now, the marginal opportunity cost of producing more cotton from going to B to C is one to produce one more ton of cotton is 1 ton of wheat. For every ton of cotton extra we grow, we lose 1 ton of wheat. That is way more than the marginal opportunity cost we had when we moved from A to B, 0.4 tons of wheat for every ton of cotton. So that is a diminishing return. And you can see that is shown in the curve by the curve becoming steeper. That's why the curve is a curve, it's not a straight line. Finally, you can just see that mark on the right there in that purple box. A, B, and C they are all efficient. We are using all of our resources for producing wheat and cotton. And as I said, in reality, there is always some inefficiency in human systems. People don't work as hard as they can. Machines break down. Water is spilled. Seeds are lost. Birds will eat some of the crop. There will always be some inefficiency. But this is a learning tool to show you how scarcity works, and I'm using this to show you opportunity cost. So here's a real life example. As you know, I haven't always worked as a lecturer. My job at University of Kurdistan is my first position in academia. I'm not a career academic or researcher like my colleagues in the faculty. I was a professional engineer. Now, my last job before working at the University of Kurdistan was in 2016. I had just got married to my wife Sarah, and I was self-employed. I wasn't working for a company. I was contracting out my services. I was living in Oman. And what I was doing, I was actually doing a lot of irrigation consultancy work. So I was helping design these, what they call in Oman, fillage or aflaj. These are these open water channels that carry water from the mountains to the farmland. And that's my friend Khamiz there, inspecting one of the villages that we worked on. Now, I was earning $40,000 a year, US dollars roughly. But I wasn't enjoying my job for various reasons, and I always wanted to go into teaching. But of course, to teach at a university, you need to have a master's degree. Now, to do a master's degree, it was going to cost me, in terms of accounting cost, $5,000. That was the tuition fee. And it would mean that I would have to stop work for 1 year so I could study and do my master's. Now, what was the true cost of me doing my master's? Well, if you're an accountant, you would say $5,000. But if you're an economist and you're a real person and you are an engineer and you understand what you're giving up, you would say that the true cost was actually $45,000. Because if I didn't do my master's, I would have carried on working that year and I would have made $40,000. So the true cost, the opportunity cost, was $45,000. $40,000, that's the money I would have made by working as an engineer, and $5,000, the tuition fee. That is the true cost, the opportunity cost. Here's another example, and this is an example similar to what you would have as an engineer. A rich businessman wants Berlin to build him a theme park. Now, the theme park, when it's made, it's going to be making $10,000 a day in profit when it's operating. He's going to be a very rich man. And he thinks it's going to take 1 year to build, and it will cost him $1 million. So he'll pay $1 million, and in a year's time, he's going to be making $10,000 a day. Now, Belind doesn't really understand economics. He's a good technical engineer, but he didn't pay attention in engineering economics. So he goes ahead and he works hard and he builds the theme park for only $800,000. But it takes 15 months to build. Now, Belind thinks his client, the businessman, is going to be really happy with him because he's thinking, I've saved him $200,000. But the rich businessman who understands economics is really angry with Belind. Explain why. Well, the opportunity cost of Belind uh, saving 200,000 and building it for 800,000, the opportunity cost was that the theme park took 3 months longer to build. Maybe Belind was not using enough machinery, which is expensive when building the theme park, and instead he was using more labor, which was cheaper, but it takes longer. And so, in the extra 3 months that it takes to open up the theme park, that rich businessman, he could have opened the theme park. Um, he could have opened the theme park 3 months earlier, and he would have been making $10,000 a day. So 3 months, let's say that's 90 days, $10,000 a day. This rich businessman, he has lost the opportunity to make $900,000. And Belinda's thinking, I've saved him $200,000. But the rich businessman is angry because he realizes the opportunity cost was far, far greater than the gain that Belinda has given him. So this is where project management comes in. We don't want to just build something at as lowest cost as possible. We've also got to consider the quality and the time. And so project management, which you'll do with me in UG4, is balancing the management of cost, quality, and time together in order to produce an option that has the lowest true cost, opportunity cost. So remember, accountants are interested in the cost that is transferred, meaning what is paid. Economists, and by extension engineers and all people actually, everyone is naturally an economist, even if they don't realize this, they are interested in the cost that is felt. So that rich businessman, he felt the loss of $900,000. I felt the loss of $45,000 when I did my master's. And so it's the feeling of, it's the cost of the second best option that is forsaken. And as I said at the end of next lecture, you should be undergoing assignment 1 now, and that's available on Moodle. Make sure you email it to me before the due date, which is on the assignment. So, we've looked at markets and specialization. We've looked at what is opportunity cost. We've looked at markets and scarcity, and we've looked at opportunity cost, which emerges from scarcity, and we've become quite familiar with production possibility curves at this stage. I now want to talk to you about what is specialization, what emerges in the marketplace, and we're going to also look at the theory of divisions of labor. And then we're going to also talk about why we use money. Why is money even a thing? And if you're also interested, at the very end of this, we're going to be talking about why Mr. Allen's wife doesn't bake cakes. I'm here in quarantine and there's no home baking. Miskin. So let's talk about what is a market. Well, this is the definition I got offline. A market is an arena where people purchase and sell products from one another. So buying and selling. Now that could be a bazaar down by the Citadel. It could also be a shop. It could be a whole country. It could also be something online. It doesn't need to be tied to any place. It doesn't need to be tied to any size. You can have markets within markets. And another word for markets is economy. Generally speaking, we use the word economy for big markets. So we use it for whole industries or for whole countries. But it's exactly the same thing as a market. It's a place where people buy and sell products to one another. So remember what we had here. We have production, which uses resources such as land or natural resources, capital, and labor, and producers or entrepreneurs, they will then produce goods and services. Those goods and services will then be sold to buyers. Now, the word we use for buyers is consumers. However, some of those consumers are in fact other producers. So let's use an example here. The farmer is producing wheat. He's using land and capital and labor, and he's producing wheat. He then sells it to a baker. Now that baker will make it into flour and then bread. And then that baker will then sell that good, that bread and flour, to other consumers. So there's actually a cycle that's happening. Consumers can be other producers who in turn use the goods and services that they've purchased to produce more goods and services and to add value. So this is where money comes into it. You know, back in the Stone Age, people didn't have money. They used to operate by bartering. Let's say I'm a fisherman. I'm living in the land of the Stone Age, and I want to have potatoes to go with my fish because I want to have fish and chips. And so I go to Shana, who's a cave woman who grows potatoes. And Shana says, and I say to Shana, I want to buy 1 bag of potatoes off you and I will give you 10 fish. And I think that's a fair price. But Shana goes, I don't like fish. I really like chicken. And so I can't actually buy any potatoes to have my fish and chips because I don't have any chicken. But Avan, who's another cave woman, she keeps chicken. She's a mad chicken lady. And I can go to Avan and I can buy chickens, exchange chickens for fish, and then go with that chicken to buy potatoes off Shana. Isn't that complicated? What happens if Avan doesn't want fish but she wants tomatoes? I'm going to have to go to Hummer's tomato farm and try and hope that he wants fish. And I've got to do multiple exchanges. Money was invented really early on as a medium of exchange to enable trade. And this happened a long time ago. That picture in the middle, that is actually a spade head that was found in ancient China. And it wasn't ever used for shoveling dirt. It was purely ornamental, and it was used as currency. It was used as a coin. And then people realized you don't actually need it to be that big, and so coins started getting a lot smaller. So that one on the right, that's actually from the ancient Sumerians. So these were the people who were around Mosul and Nineveh long before the Kurds, and they actually started making coins there. It's probably one of the first places, along with Syria, or Assyria as it was known, where coins were first used. And then later it became standardized, and they started being recognized by governments and kings. So the pictures of kings were put on the coin. So the one in the bottom left, you can see that's actually from the Roman Empire, sorry, the Greek Empire. And then eventually they realized, you know what, metal is very expensive. Why don't we just use paper? Because there's no need for us to spend all this money just for this medium of exchange. And paper was a lot cheaper. And look at the bottom one in the right, that's Bitcoin. Those coins don't actually exist. That's actually a computer generated image. You don't actually need to have a physical medium of exchange. It can just be cryptocurrency. It sits on the internet and it's just a number in your account. Now, this enables trade to happen without bartering, where I have to go to Hummer to buy tomatoes off Hummer so I can buy chicken off Ivan, so I can buy potatoes off Shana, so I can have fish and chips. This way I can just go to Shana with the currency, with the money, buy potatoes at a fair price, that's agreed, and then she can use that money to buy whatever it is she wants. So that's how money came to be, and it came about very early on, around 6,000-7,000 years ago. So remember, consumers will buy a good and service when they deem that its value to them is more than the producer is selling it for. So there they see that the benefits of having that product is greater than the cost to them. The benefit is greater than the opportunity cost, I should add. And that will mean that they are willing and they are able to buy it. And that will mean they will buy it. So willing means that they have done an economic analysis in their brains, even if they don't realize it, and they say, you know what, the joy I'm going to get from having that ice cream is greater than the cost of 1,000 dinar that the seller is selling it for. Therefore, I'm going to buy the ice cream. The benefits exceed the cost. That means the consumer is willing. Now, being able means the consumer has the resources to purchase it. I may well think the ice cream has more benefit to me than the 1,000 dinar that it's being sold for, but if I don't have 1,000 dinar, I don't have the resources to purchase it, which means I am not able and I will not buy it. So remember, a consumer will buy a product, a good or service, only if they are willing and they are able. So let's have an example here. Saad, he sees a nice car. It's the new Ferrari 599, and it's on sale for $100,000. Is he willing and able to buy it? Well, he's probably willing. He probably thinks, man, a Ferrari 599, that is worth way more than $100,000. If I had the choice of having $100,000 or a Ferrari 599, I'm going to choose the Ferrari. He's willing to buy it. But is he able to buy it? Well, probably not. $100,000 for a car? Very few people in the world have that capacity, and I don't think Saad does. So Saad is willing, but he's not able to buy it, and so he does not buy it. So now let's look at another aspect that we have happening here. In a marketplace, you have a situation called division of labor, and this happens all over the world. Let's look at this picture. How many people are working in this bakery? Well, you've got 3 people there, maybe even 4 actually. You've got one man who's making the dough, and he's pounding the dough into balls. You've got another man who's baking the dough in the oven. You've also got a third man who's arranging the bread, and he's probably selling it to the customers. Or you might have another person in there just bringing in the dough, bringing in the flour, probably another person cleaning, who knows. But let's say you've got 3 people, those 3 people you see. You've got the dough maker, you've got the baker, and you've got the cashier. What would happen if they were all doing the same job? What if all of them were making dough, then putting that dough in the oven, and then trying to sell it to people at the front? Would they produce as much? Not nearly as much, because of specialization. If all you do is make dough, you're going to be getting really good at it. You're going to be making dough all the time. If all you do is bake the bread, you're going to get really good at it. If you're the cashier, you're going to be quick and you're going to be efficient. But if you were doing all of those jobs and the 2 men next to you, your colleagues, were doing all of those jobs, it's going to be a lot slower. You're going to have to move around that small bakery, transfer positions, and inefficiency will come about. And you're not going to produce nearly as much bread, and you're going to be making a lot less money as a bakery. That is division of labor. What those 3 men have done, even just naturally and implicitly, is they have divided their labor amongst themselves to be more efficient. Now, the same principle applies for individuals and countries. You know what? Today, I am doing all of my lectures for online for the next few weeks in one go. And then tomorrow, I'm going to start uploading them to YouTube. Why? Because I'm recognizing division of labor. I would rather specialize in making these videos today, and tomorrow I'm going to specialize in uploading them. And I'm going to be more efficient by doing that. And the same can go for countries. Countries divide labor. There are millions of different jobs in Kurdistan, and people are divided according to labor to produce different goods and services, which they then buy and sell to one another in the marketplace using the medium of money. So let's look back at the age of the cavemen. In the age of the cavemen had 2 jobs. There were literally 2 jobs you could do. You could be a hunter, or you could be a gatherer. Those were literally the only jobs you could do. You could gather things for your tribe, or you could hunt. Those were the 2 divisions of labor. Now, it was very inefficient, wasn't it? Just having minimal divisions of labor. They probably had the women gathering and the men hunting. And so, because of that low division of labor, their society was very primitive. There wasn't a lot of efficiency in the economy. Now we get to the Middle Ages. Now, in the Middle Ages, you start to see a lot more division of labor happening. There is farmers, there is horse cart drivers, there is builders, and suddenly development is going much faster. And so you can see the development of society in the Middle Ages. It is tied to the division of labor and people becoming more specialized. And then we get to the Industrial Revolution. Now, the Industrial Revolution, which came about at around 16th to 18th century, suddenly people moved from the villages where they were working on farms and they moved to big cities. And really, until this age, there had never really been a city or any town with a population bigger than 100,000. Up until this point, there were no major cities. And the Industrial Revolution came to London first, and London became a huge city with these massive factories. And you can see the people working in that factory, they are really specialized, way more than they ever were on the farm. They are doing one thing. They are turning a wheel. They are removing dust from the coal. They're shoveling coal into the steam machine. They're pounding the paper. They're cutting the wood. But they're all doing one very specialized task. And production, and because of that, civilization made huge increases during the Industrial Revolution. And that really created the platform for the modern world. We are specialized more than we ever have been. The truth is, if you're going to be a good civil engineer in society today, you're not going to be a civil engineer. You're going to be a dam safety engineer. You're going to be a bridge structural engineer. You're going to be an earthquake analysis engineer. You're going to be a project manager for major highway developments. We learn to specialize, and we see that even at the university. I can tell you now, there is no way I could teach you what Dr. Kamran teaches you in geological engineering. My knowledge of geotechnical engineering is probably not much better than a university graduate. I did a bit of geotechnical engineering following my graduation, but not a lot. I specialized in different areas. I specialized in dam safety engineering. I specialized in project management and renewable energy. And now I specialize in engineering education. And because of that specialization, we have been able to develop civilization far more than any time in history. Look from left to right here. That drive, that progress that you see is driven by specialization. The more specialized we become in our work, the more developed we can make our society. That is divisions of labor. Specialization leads to economic growth or market growth. Now, in terms of international trade, what does Kurdistan specialize in? Think about that. That's maybe a question for the tutorial. Another question is, why are you specializing in civil engineering? And a third question, in your household, what are the day-to-day tasks that need to be performed? How are the divisions of labor divided amongst the members of your household? And could it be done more efficiently? So let's discuss that maybe in the tutorial. Think about those three questions. Now, I want to talk to you about how do you make those decisions? How did you come to the decision of specializing in civil engineering? How did you come to the decision of Kurdistan come to the decision of specializing in oil? Well, it comes down to something we call comparative advantage. It means we can specialize in something better than other countries. We can specialize in something better than other individuals. Now, that means we can produce a product, in the case of a civil engineer, a civil engineering consultancy, a design service, you can produce it at a lower opportunity cost than others. That does not mean a lower accounting cost. You can produce it at a lower price. No, it means at a lower opportunity cost. That's what it means to have a comparative advantage or a competitive advantage. So here's an example. Let's say there are two countries, Kurdistan and Turkey. Now, Turkey is always buying oil off Kurdistan. And Kurdistan, in turn, is buying food from Turkey. They're using the money that they get from selling the oil to Turkey to buy food from Turkey. This is international trade. Now, Turkey already has oil. They're producing oil as well. In fact, they're producing more oil than Kurdistan. Why would it buy oil from Kurdistan? Well, some people would say it's the accounting cost, meaning that Turkey's oil, they have to spend more money to get it out of the ground. Well, that's actually not necessarily true. I think actually they can get it out of the ground a lot cheaper than Kurdistan in terms of accounting cost. But for Turkey, there is a greater opportunity cost. And therefore, Kurdistan has the comparative advantage when it comes to oil. Now, to do this, I'm going to show you this using a production possibility. So, to show you how this comparative advantage works and why Turkey buys oil off Kurdistan and Kurdistan buys food off Turkey, we're going to look at the production possibility curves for both countries. So you can see here we have two production possibility curves. We've got the orange one for Kurdistan and we've got the green one for Turkey. Now, the y-axis is the number of barrels of oil produced every day, and the x-axis is the ton of food produced every day. Now, right away, you can tell that Turkey can produce more oil and more food than Kurdistan. It's a bigger country. Why then would Turkey ever bother to buy oil off Kurdistan? Why doesn't it just produce more of its own oil? Well, look at their positions on the curves. Now, that little black dot on the Turkey curve, you can see that it is 5-1. That means the marginal opportunity cost for Turkey to produce one more barrel of oil is 5 tons of food. If they put all of their resources, labor, capital, whatever, into producing one more barrel of oil, they will lose 5 tons of food every day. Kurdistan, on the other hand, if they produce one more barrel of oil, they will lose 3 tons of food every day. Those are the marginal opportunity costs. So, would Kurdistan want to produce more food? Well, they can, but they will be losing more oil than if they just sold the oil to Turkey for the same amount of food. Likewise for Turkey, do they want to produce more oil? Well, they would get the oil at a far lower opportunity cost, if they just sold food in exchange for oil to Kurdistan. What happens here is trade. There will be a price that both parties will see the benefit of. The benefit outweighs the cost, and Turkey will trade 4 tons of food, and Kurdistan in turn will use that money to buy to sell. Uh, Turkey will sell 4 tons of food to Kurdistan, and they in turn will use that money to buy 1 barrel of oil. Now, what would happen if they weren't trading? Turkey, to get an extra barrel of oil, they would lose 5 tons of food. It would cost them more in opportunity cost. Kurdistan, to get 4 tons of food, well, that's actually going to cost them about 1 1/3 barrels of oil. So both countries are happy with trading, because trading allows them to specialize in the things that they are competitive in. They have a competitive advantage, meaning they can produce something at a lower opportunity cost. And that's why countries specialize. That's why there isn't really a lot of agriculture happening in Kurdistan. It is better for Kurdistan economically at the moment, maybe not security-wise, but in terms of economics, not to farm their own food, but rather to focus on producing oil and then buying food from Turkey and Iran. That's just the reality of the situation. So, trade, and especially international trade, that really allows us to specialize, not only as individuals and businesses, but even as countries, and that can drive economic growth. One of the real big issues with the pandemic at the moment is that there is very little trade happening between countries, and that's why the world's economy is failing. The world's economy is dropping because we cannot produce things at the levels of efficiency where we cooperate, just like those men in the bakery. So remember, the KRG has comparative advantage on oil, and Turkey has comparative advantage with food, and therefore they trade. That's the end of this lecture.